Victoria 3's fifth diary is about production methods and how to apply them and what kind of production method to choose from. As your technology increases, you will have access to more production methods, but not all of them are just better. They are also different. They will need different inputs, they will need different employees, and they will have different outputs. So there's a production method for every type of society. So that is where the connection is again. Economy, society. It's a direct influence. Back and forth. So what's it about? So just upgrading will not work in Victoria 3. It's not a no-brainer improvement. It will have 2 to 5 production methods in a building. So this is about buildings, inputs, outputs, what employee types it needs to operate. It depends on the building and the production method. So most categories of the production methods fall into one of 4 types. The base, the refining, the automation, and the ownership. The base governs the general tech level and efficiency of the building, produces goods typical for the building type. Base production. Like if you have a brewery, it brews something to drink. Most probably something alcoholic. Mostly beer. Refining reduces output of typical goods in favor of output of specialized or luxury goods, sometimes adding a special input. You might have beer, you might have some whiskey added to it from some of the hops. Something different. Coming out of there, more refined, more specialized, more expensive. But the other output of goods will be reduced. Then we have automation that adds industrial goods as input to reduce the building's unskilled workforce requirement. So you now need a skilled workforce, but in exchange, you will have more goods output. Then you have ownership. That's also quite important, determines who owns shares in the building, typically governed by laws. So we have an example here, the food industries. You can see productivity, employee, and so on. And there is a selection of production methods. As you can see, it's 5 different things, and one of that is not yet filled. So with the right technologies, food industries can make groceries from both grain, coming from bakeries, and fish from canneries. They can also refine grain and sugar into liquor, distilleries. With advanced technologies, food industries can be partially automated, drastically reducing the need for unskilled labor. The simple food industries are operated by the merchant guilds, shopkeepers, while more advanced and profitable food industries are owned by capitalists who reinvest some of their dividends and invest in the production process and so on. So, as one example, an iron mine's base production methods determines if miners use only picks and shovels or if they also use some sort of engine-driven pumping mechanism, like the first steam engines. Different pumping technologies, which also determine what fuel is used. More advanced the pumping mechanism, the more deposits can be accessed and the faster iron can be mined. But the more coal or oil is also used in the process. A quicker exploitation needs an investment. And the investment can be done with a better production method. The better production method comes with higher tech. With higher tech pumps comes a requirement for more engineers and machinists. So you also need skilled laborers for these things to be on site to control and oversee its operation. This creates more demand for qualified workers and also opens up a number of better paid positions to those pops who meet the qualifications. Then it refers to history. The revolution in chemical sciences of the era also enabled the use of explosives in mining, which is another secondary production method category used only in mines. As you can see, there's different categories here, and that is one of them. Once the nitroglycerin is invented, it can be used in mines to generate even more minerals at the expense of explosives produced by the chemical industry, but also with a higher rate of workplace accidents. By researching less volatile dynamite, even more minerals are extracted at the expense of even more explosives, but with the additional benefit that far fewer workers will blow themselves up on the job. So you see, it's all a step-by-step process. You will have a disadvantage if you go for the better production method that gives you more output. Your workers will be harmed. The accidents will have an influence on the gameplay too. A negative, of course. Once invented, the portable steam donkey engines can be deployed at mining sites to drastically reduce the amount of manual labor required just for hauling. If you've ever played something like RimWorld, at a certain point you need just some people to just haul. They need to just haul. And that's because you cannot use the real technology. Like in Factorio. So this costs the building some money in the form of coal and engines, but reduces the amount of money they have to pay in wages. Perhaps more importantly, it frees those laborers up to do other work in other buildings, or more advanced work in the same building, for example as a machinist, if the state is running low on workers. But if wages are already very depressed, it might not be a great idea to purchase expensive industrial goods just to increase the unqualified labor pool further. So this might not be a no-brainer decision for a player to make. So if you have enough people unemployed, you can use them for the low-paid jobs. If you have higher qualified people, strive to have more higher qualified jobs to have more efficient buildings. But you don't need more efficient buildings if you have the workforce available, and it has no other use, really. So there's that. There's some steps in a society just need prerequisites. And most often, education is one of these prerequisites, as is technology. In most countries, simple mines are owned and operated by merchant guilds at the game's start. These are small-time purveyors of the goods produced, represented by shopkeepers. Once the mines start to industrialize, the capitalists step in to take over ownership. Capitalists are, of course, a phenomenon that is also usually made by groups, and it is also a fluid process. Like in history, some of the nobles would become capitalists, some of the capitalists would become nobles, and they would rise to the upper echelons. And how did they do that? By forming companies. Because you cannot do it alone, yeah. These capitalists will come from shopkeepers promoted to these newly created positions, but some might come from other pops in the state. Even other capitalists in buildings not quite as lucrative as these new mines. There are fewer capitalists than shopkeepers, but they draw a higher wage, and more importantly, they will reinvest some of their earnings into the country's expanding industry, depending on how much profit their workplace is generating for them. Because they have higher earnings, they can afford to do so. As new ideas spread across the society, you might be able to make the mining industry publicly traded instead of privately held, and later on in the game perhaps even nationalize them again to be run by government bureaucrats, or turn them into cooperatives where profit is split between workers. Like in communism. Like there's something to that, right? To have more control over the production process, you might do that. So you can see here, that's an example of the ownership. That's that legal thing here. Merchant guilds, privately owned, publicly traded, government run, worker cooperative. These are all options for that. Production methods aren't limited to consuming and producing goods. The government administrations employ bureaucrats and clerks who use paper to produce bureaucracy, one of the game's capacities that let you govern more people and extend more state services to them. Railways, for example, consume engines, so you need to produce engines, and a fuel such as coal, so you need to produce coal to produce both transportation and infrastructure constantly. It is not a fixed modifier, it is something that you need to provide constantly. It is also a service good. The former which is sold in the market, and the latter which allows the state to support more buildings without loss of market access. So if you have a supply shortage, also your transportation and infrastructure can go down as a result, resulting in a breakdown of your economy. Universities employ academics that let the state guide research and development of new technologies and ideas. Virtually any kind of currency, modifier, or effect can be produced by production methods in buildings and can be applied in a variety of ways to the country, state, or even the building itself. The academics seek progress, but of course you cannot ignore like the capitalists. Many improvements have been made by artisans, capitalists, shopkeepers, and more often than not, also not by the universities. Academics usually develop ideas and fundamentals, and the real practical application comes by people that want to solve a problem. So these problem solvers. I don't know how one can simulate that, but I just wanted to mention it. Like, academics are good to know more about the world, to get access to the ideas, and you need other people to make the ideas real. And to make the ideas useful by solving a problem with something that is based on the ideas that are developed very often by researchers. We have an example here of the government administration in the Champagne. A basic government administration consumes 10 paper, produces 50 bureaucracy per fully staffed level, but each additional level beyond the first adds a 2% throughput bonus due to economy of scale. This increases both consumption of paper and output of bureaucracy, yielding more productivity from each of the POPs that work the building. So, level the building up, it works more efficiently, but it also needs more input. As you can see here. I also have a production method here. That's at production method 2. As you can see, this one is at level 5 already. It has a higher throughput. It has some infrastructure usage. It produces urbanization and a lot of weekly bureaucracy at the expense of some expenses, 5.991k. This, of course, adds a tremendous capacity for modding in new buildings and production methods. So you can modify just about everything. That trend continues. That's the paradox mark. One of the paradox marks is, apart from the DLCs, that there's modability everywhere. Embassies that increase your influence, but which can also be configured to consume wine and meat at state expense to increase the speed at which you improve relations. Shantytown temples that can only be built on coastlines, consume fish, create jobs for POPs qualifying for the Deep Ones profession, increasing state mortality, but also the weekly rate of global Cthulhu rising counter. We can't wait to see what madness will be unleashed. Yeah, there's something like that, and that would definitely fit into the time, right? Lovecraft being at the end of the Victorian period, but solidly in there still. If tweaking multiple production methods across several categories on every single building in the game sounds a bit complex compared to linear building upgrades, that's right. But they've added a number of tools to help with this process. So there's the buildings panel, which we have below here. You can get an overview of all buildings in your country organized by major and minor type. For example, all rural buildings, furniture manufactories, ports. If you have buildings of the same type in different states, you can break it down further to view the individual building even. On each level you can see how profitable the building is and adjust its production methods. You can set all production methods for a certain building type to a specific setting all across your country with one click, which is a good thing. Like if you want to change everything in one thing. Yeah. So that's the production, the buildings panel, as you can see here. In that example, the United States of America. What unknown country is this? Louisiana, is that something French? Oh well. From the buildings panel, you can get a bird's eye view of all the industries in your country and see at a glance how they're doing financially. You can change production methods on an individual building or on all of them at once. You can even expand buildings directly from this screen, like it was also done in Victoria 2, or click on one to get an in-depth view of its balance sheet and workforce. You can go massively into detail if you want so, or you can just like choose the macroeconomic approach if you want to do that too. So minimizing the requirement for mental math, they've also created prediction tools. We have seen that in the previous dev diary. So give you a breakdown of what to expect from choosing a certain production method. We have seen that from the expected market price, but there's also a preview for the production methods based on profitability predictions, taking adjusted production and consumption into account, summarizing which new job positions will be created, which will disappear. So the structural change prediction. While it may on the surface seem obvious to just enable production methods that make the buildings more profitable, one must keep in mind the societal effects as well. So you have higher paid POPs. These have different needs and so on. Are there enough POPs in the state that qualify for the more advanced jobs, or will you have just open jobs? Will the wage for these new jobs be sufficient to entice those POPs to switch professions? Will you inadvertently create a whole new class of well-to-do machinists that may have pro-labor union sentiments? Oh no. Or will the increased profits not lead to higher wages in the building because they're already competitive and fully employed, and will simply result in more dividends for the shareholders, which will be funneled into increased luxury consumption? So, which you choose might depend on the population's social mobility, what politics you favor. A socialist uprising may not be in the plans, and whether you're able to supply luxuries yourself without benefiting your rival. You don't want too many well-off people if you have to break your mercantilism that worked so well for you, right? More profitable domestic industries are never bad, but should be far from the only consideration when building the society. There it is again. Influence of economy into society and society into economy. That's something that I really like. So there's the predictive tool tips. So that is the next step from the predictive market price. The predictive tool tip. We'll explain the anticipated impact on the building's balance as a result of changes in production, consumption, wage requirements, as well as the changes in employment that could also impact the country's politics over time. You'll also be forewarned if there aren't enough qualifying POPs to take on new professions created, as this could limit the industry's effectiveness if you change it all at once, as you can see here. There's a warning here if you have craftsman sewing enabled, changing the luxury production method to craftsman sewing, not enough qualifications to fully staff the buildings. Predicted impact though is plus 71.8, so it's a good thing. It's really high. Goods production will go down for clothes, will go massively up for luxury clothes, as you can see here. Consumption will go massively up for silk, as you can see here. So, it costs more, but it will bring you less. It might bring you less. See, it's also dependent on the market prices. There will be an increased employment of shopkeepers selling all these luxury clothes. I mean, that's fewer clothes, but you need to sell them. Decreased employment for the laborers that just need to produce clothes, and these will be sold because everyone needs them. And yeah, that's all. That's already all to it. Now that's a fantastic dev diary here. It's so detailed. It's so well explained. I love it. It's very good. So next week there will be domestic politics. That's something interesting too, because it features top down. This is bottom up mostly, even though you're using a top down method to steer it, but it comes from a fundamental mechanic and builds up from there. But politics and policies usually come from the top and influence everything down to the bottom. So it will be very interesting how this will be integrated into that system. Have a great time until next time, and happy gaming. This is Immanuel Can signing out. See you soon and happy gaming.